Kafka's playstyle in Honkai Star Rail is as enigmatic as her story, lore, personality. In general, there are two main ways to play Kafka, and the first is a damage over time focus. One of the main downsides of damage over time characters in general is that because they do so little small instances of damage, although it's a lot, if you're only dishing out small amounts and not killing off monsters that heal and stuff like that, you don't exactly get a lot of damage output in the end because enemies just heal up everything. Kafka solves a lot of this downside because her skill amplifies damage and makes all of the damage over time proc in an instant. This means you remove all of these heal factor and you just concentrate all the damage in a very single instant. This works not only for herself, but any other character that procs damage over time works really well as well. Characters like Sampo, which have a lot of wind shear in his factor, even Asta with some tracers, and a lot of other characters with some kind of damage over time factor benefit from Kafka. If you are planning to play debuffs or you really like this damage over time factor of like stacking damage over time buffs on enemy and proccing them all at once, I think Kafka will be a very interesting and fun character to play. What I actually prefer in terms of a Kafka build is the second way to play her. Instead of focusing on her damage over time aspect, we are going to play her for a DPS role in terms of an AoE DPS. And the reason for this is because, for example, if you look at her ability here, right here, her talent actually allows her to follow up an attack. So for example, she uses her ulti, she procs shock on all the enemies, and for example, Natasha does an auto attack on an enemy. Kafka will then follow up with 150% of an attack multiplier on a particular target. This allows Kafka to be not only an AoE damage dealer with her ultimate, her skill ability as well, but also very strong single target focus damage, because 150% is a very significant amount. And although she can only use her talent once per turn, this is often mitigated with characters like Asta. Asta not only in her tracers provides a bit of burn damage in her auto attacks, but also she gives her speed buff and attack buff to Kafka, allowing her to move quicker, and the faster Kafka moves, the faster she charges up her energy restoration, which allows her to have very good uptime on her shock procs, because she self-procs shock. And then again, she also has a very good single target damage with her follow-up attacks, comboing a lot of these characters. I really like a team of, for example, Kafka running into Asta super buff, and running a healer like Natasha as a next slot. You have very good healing with Natasha together if she tends to use her basic attack quite often. This will allow Kafka to proc her follow-ups very well and also maintain the skill points needed for Asta to use her skill. Asta generally doesn't like to normal attack and won't really be proccing her burn damage over time, so I won't really count on that in terms of DOT, but it's a nice added bonus to have as well. Instead, she wants to use her skill, so she provides a lot of speed and attack to the rest of the team. With a good amount of speed, you actually indirectly give your whole team energy restoration, which is what Natasha as well as Kafka really like. And the second slot, you can run a character like Danheng, and this is really a very strong free-to-play comp with very good single target damage, very good AoE damage from Kafka, as well as some sustain, as well as already some buffing to do. And now at this point, some of you might be wondering, I think a few of you might be noticing, Serval is also an interesting character because she procs shock with her abilities as well. So some of you might be thinking to run Serval with Kafka, and the key downside to this is you actually don't get the element diversification because two of your damage dealers are lightning. Of course, if you're fighting a floor that is primarily weak to lightning and maybe the content that you require needs a lot of lightning damage, Serval is going to be a really strong addition to a duo in terms of Kafka and Serval. Might miss out a little bit on lightning single target damage, but you could always add in a lightning single target damage dealer who's gacha like Ireland later on if you want to play, for example, with a defensive unit like Gepard, Bailu in the third slot. But this is one thing to know, Serval might not be best for Kafka, especially early on in most accounts, because of the double focusing too much on lightning might make you not clear as much of the utility factor of tackling a lot of content. But if you just want the min-max lightning, definitely an interesting comp to run as well. So alright, since Kafka is actually not on the first and second banner of Honkai Star Rail, most of us will probably have access to a couple of 4-star gacha characters. So now let's talk real quick. If we have some access to gacha 4 stars, who will I change in this lineup? And the first character that I think comes to mind will be definitely a character like Susang. Susang is a character that works really well on this team because she's relatively independent and already has quite a number of speed buffs on her own. With Asta's additional flat-based speed multiplier, together with attack buffs, Susang uses all of that and she also likes to use her ultimate very well as well. Strong single target damage, very strong focus on the physical weakness. This allows you to play into a lightning weakness enemy, physical weakness enemy, or even a fire weakness enemy. I think a really strong team overall. And this is one of the rare teams. Some of you might be asking cheekily in the comments like, tell me one team that Ting Yun is not good in and stuff like that. And this is an example actually of one of the teams where Esta outperforms Ting Yun. And the reason for that is the team-wide speed buffs that Esta offers in this team synergize much better with Kafka and characters like Natasha compared to characters like Ting Yun. Ting Yun really doubles down on like a particular damage dealer and giving a lot of investment to the character. But you will notice that with a team like Esta in this 4, you will be rotating through your ultimate ability very often in each of the characters. Combined with putting attack buffs on Susang, Esta herself as well as Kafka, this means you have damage coming from a lot of sources and with very adept weakness breakers like Susang as well as Kafka. Ting Yun, on the other hand, in this team together with Kafka, doesn't really add too much value to Kafka. You increase her damage, you increase her energy restoration, yes, she's sure, but ultimately the team's DPS, you'll notice, is a bit lacking as Kafka doesn't have fantastic base stats in terms of her attack, as she's very well rounded in terms of slightly defensive with a lot of HP tracers. So that's a bit of commentary about Ting Yun. Of course, this is a very strong team to play. I wouldn't really recommend playing other single target characters like Hook here, for example. Ting Che is a bit more AoE as well, and other AoE options really fight against Kafka, so I wouldn't really recommend these characters. Ireland is because he prefers a bit of shielding, and Kafka generally is pretty tanky herself, and Susang doesn't mind taking damage as she has no passive that if she takes damage, she becomes weaker and stuff like that. So this team doesn't really mind taking damage as Natasha just heals them up. Ireland won't really work really well in this situation. The other alternative you can consider instead of playing Susang is a character like Hook, who offers really good single target damage as well, and really likes a character like Esta to give him that attack buff, that speed buff, as well as fire damage bonus. So this also is a really strong team to have, but generally I prefer Susang because of her more speed oriented play and very independent and flexible to be played in another team as well, especially if you are an early game player. But if you need a lot of fire damage for a particular floor, you won't really see much downside playing Hook here instead of Susang as well. And of course, Sampo is an excellent choice if you really want to dish out a lot of damage on with damage over time teams. I'm mainly focusing here more on more of an AoE DPS role for Kafka instead of damage over time, and perhaps I'll do another follow-up video, maybe closer to a launch, on a bit more damage over time once we have the final numbers, because DOT is really sensitive on exact multipliers. And I'll leave in the pinned comment below if you guys are interested in a follow-up video closer to date as well. Whereas the team comps that we mentioned here on an AoE DPS more or less stands because it's more of core concepts, regardless of the final a little bit of adjustments that Hoyoverse might do as the game goes live. And if you guys are finding value in the content so far, do like and subscribe as it will really help the channel grow to reach out to more people as well. Now let's talk a bit about a pay-to-win team. I don't mean it in the literal sense, because by the time we actually see Kafka's banner, we probably already have like multiple 5-star characters. Some luckier free-to-play might even have a whole team of 5-star characters. So there's something of value for everyone in this section as well, even though it says here, pay-to-win. So let's talk first about the best character for Kafka, in my opinion at least. I think a very strong team with Kafka is a combination of Zealer as well as Kafka. I've already done a video of showing both of them together, and this is very unintuitive at first, but let me explain why. Kafka has very strong AoE damage and also a single target damage component with her passive follow-up attacks. It's very significant, especially if you build her for speed and proccing it very much as well. Zealer is a character that already has very high amounts of base speed. What this means is that any team that focuses on bumping them up for speed, for example in the last slot here you have Esta, they really capitalize on moving very often and lapping the opponents in terms of turns very often as well. Zealer in a sense has a lot of single target damage, but she's also slightly AoE in nature, where if she one-shots a target who's at relatively low life, she gets to act again. Kafka is known for not being able to finish off units in a single blow with her ultimate and even her skill because of damage over time, smaller amount of instances, and maybe they all don't proc at a particular time because you didn't use her skill, and combined together affect her passive and single target. This allows Zealer to actually capitalize on Kafka's quote-unquote weaknesses by finishing off targets that are almost dead, proccing her burst and immediately acting on the next unit with an enhanced state. So they really synergize very well with each other as they both do a bit of AoE damage here and a bit of single target damage here as well. some things that are not very intuitive at first unless you actually play the team. I've already shown this team in action. You guys can check on the channel. It's like a Kafka and Zealer team, so just search it out and you can find it in action. The last slot that I used in that team comp was a character like Natasha. If you have more characters in your team, perhaps you have Bailu, definitely works well as well. You could also use Luota if you want more offensive options, and maybe if the game is up to Kafka's point, maybe Luota has been released or is about to release soon as well. And Natasha is very, very good here because firstly, she's very efficient. She's free to play, everyone will have access to her as well. And also, she works very well with this team comp as she does like to normal attack quite a lot, especially if there's not much healing to do. With Esta giving her a lot of speed, means that she has quite good amounts of energy already to use her burst. If most characters are at full life most of the time, she'll be auto-attacking quite often to proc Kafka's follow-up attack. Very, very good balance in terms of skill point this team. I would say personally, this is my favorite team in all of Honkai Star Rail, even better than like a mono quantum team. Just because of its cost efficiency. This is probably one of the best teams that I have encountered as I was playing a lot of betas, and it's a team that I'll definitely be pushing on my sub accounts. My main account is going to be free to play, clearing content free to play for you guys with totally free to play units. And of course, at the beginning of Honkai Star Rail, maybe you chose Yanqing instead of Zealer. In this case, you can always run Yanqing together with Kafka as well, as he pretty much fulfills a similar role together with Zealer. One of the downsides, or the only downsides to Yanqing, is he doesn't really synergize with Natasha as well, because he prefers a bit more shielding instead of healing, as he doesn't want to take damage to lose his passive, which gives him quite a lot of crit stats already. It works really well with Esta still, with both the attack buffing as well as speed buffing to make him move even faster. And of course, other 5-star characters you can consider will be a character like Bronya, if let's say you're running perhaps a hyper carry in the second slot. Kafka generally doesn't really need Bronya's buff, but doesn't mind the AoE buffs that she provides. What this means, if you're running Bronya instead of perhaps Esta, Kafka really needs a lot more speed to get her turns up quicker, as you really want to focus your damage buffing on a Hun character to be able to one-shot. So you can run a team of like Kafka, you can run Zealer, you can run Bronya to buff up Zealer. But one thing to know is Kafka definitely won't be taking as many turns without Esta's massive speed buff as well. Kafka doesn't really need a character that is defensive, like for example Gepard, March 7th or Fire MC, because Kafka actually, if you look at her distribution, she has very high HP stats unusually, and a lot of the tracers also make her a lot more tankier. So she's built in a very unique way where she's also tanky, yet deals a lot of good damage on the side from damage over time, AoE damage, very flexible DPS to play, and I'm just surprised at how well-rounded this character is. She's not going to be the best in anything in my opinion, as there are better characters in every single slot that she's in, but her well-roundedness just makes her very efficient and very versatile as well, and going to be relatively difficult to power creep her completely. And if you like such content, do like and subscribe for more of such future content. I'll be definitely covering more content on the channel as I already have. You can check it out in these two videos right here. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.